Thank you very much, Michelle. Uh, if I started talking now about how I feel, it would take all day uh, because I have never experienced so much hospitality and gratitude and good feeling in 1 hour. This is what life is like when the moment of happiness arrives. Uh, so I, I also want to thank not only you, but the Italian language, which I'm sorry, I don't speak. And that's a source of sadness because I feel like everything I think and say in English must be better in Italian. How is that? How does that miracle occur? I don't know. You will have to explain that to me. Those of you who are bilingual and can think in both languages. Uh, Mikhail, thank you for, let me go back one slide. This is the theme, well, first for that. Sorry, no, going way too fast. Seeing through madness is my topic, and I want to emphasize why the word through. It's not looking at, it is seeing through. And that's why I'm guided by this wonderful statement by William Blake. I think of visual culture as a discipline. Uh, of course, it involves looking at things, uh, taking in the visual, but it also always involves seeing beyond, seeing through, uh, and seeing through in two senses. One is the idea that we are seeing beyond the appearance, not just looking at, but seeing through it to something deeper, uh, and finding that hope. Uh, the other is an expression, I don't know how this translates into Italian, but when we see something through, we we go beyond it in time. Uh, it's as if we were looking at it as a framework, like a window. I see through the window to something beyond the window. So I want you to think of madness here, not only as an object, but as a window, uh, something we see through. Nietzsche's remark, I think, is simply true, and it has become even more true today than when he said it. It was already true in the 19th century. Uh, but now it, it becomes even more urgent because I feel like it's a statement about our species, about the human species, uh, which is our subject. We are humanists. We study the humanities, art, literature, music, the media, all of the, what Aristotle called all the means of imitation, that we try to look at ourselves in drama, theater, literature, everything from the epic to the novel. Uh, so our time is not Nietzsche's time. It's a time of even deeper crisis because now we know we are living in a time when the human species has no guarantee that it will go on forever. Uh, so I want to emphasize Nietzsche's last word, epoch, uh, the period, the time. And I ask you to think about this in terms of our time we share as the present. I hope that I don't have to explain why our time is deep into what Nietzsche called an epoch of insanity. And what that means is that madness becomes the rule and not the exception. And it's no accident then that it becomes embodied in rulers. in sovereignty, in authority, political authority particularly. And the moment when political authority begins to go insane, to do terrible, irrational, and destructive things. Of course, there's a question immediately. Well, and I don't think I need to make a list for you of the new authoritarianism, new forms of fascism all over the planet, where, and it seems to mostly be men. Italy now has a woman. Men who go crazy with power. They believe they are gods. They think that their will is law, and they are themselves are above the law. So in a time of when many crises are occurring, when, for instance, we have a period of American political violence that could quickly be upstaged by a nuclear exchange with the mad tyrant of Russia. My friend in Lake Como, Luca Del Baldo, has made this amazing painting showing the convergence of religious authority and political authority. The 200 churches have been destroyed in Ukraine. It's not just a war, it's a holy war. I thought the human race had gone beyond holy war, but no, we have one in Europe, not so far from here. So shades of destruction hover over our time. It takes me back to the time of my childhood. I think I'm older than most of the people in this room. So I became conscious in the 1950s, the era that we called mutual assured destruction, which was a global strategy to prevent the human species from destroying itself. If we could balance the powers of destruction one against another, somehow we could survive our own tendencies to violence. Today, well, not today, but yesterday, was the 60th anniversary of something called the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was a college student during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and this was 1962. And the students gathered to say, is this really the end? Because Kennedy and Khrushchev were threatening a nuclear holocaust. As a child of the Cold War, I was trained in a familiar drill. In case of nuclear attack, get under your desk, put your head between your knees, and kiss your ass goodbye. I don't know if that translates into Italian. I also, at that time, because I someday was going to be a visual culture scholar, I was a fan of comic books. I admit it. I love comic books, but our ceiling is also a comic. There was a comic book that had in it a cover very much like the image you see here. You have to use your imagination. You need to imagine two aliens from outer space standing next to their flying saucer. And they are looking in the distance, and on the horizon is a dome of glass. And under it is the profile of Manhattan Island, New York. The rest of the landscape is desert with craters. It's all destruction. The aliens are saying, they must have been a very interesting species. And I wonder where they went. But they left this behind as a monument. So we will keep it as a museum of whatever the human human species was. Uh, well, that I've never been able to track this memory down, but it was there, I think, in the magazine Amazing Stories sometime in the 1950s. So what does that have to do with our time? I have been writing this in Rome. I'm at the American Academy there until December. And as I look at Rome, we are up on the Gianicolo looking over the city. When I look at it, I feel an invisible dome there, as if Rome is a city of ruins preserved as some kind of lesson for us, a lesson too complex for any one person to understand. So many layers of time, 2,000 years and more of history. But even as I look at Rome and feel this enigma, it already feels familiar to me for some reason. I think it has to do with being an American who was born in Los Angeles, very close to Hollywood, where Hollywood was making Rome into a kind of mirror of its own obsession with screen idols and mass culture spectacle. Because after all, in some way, the Romans invented mass culture. Maybe they invented cinema before the cinema. So in the 19th century, Buffalo Bill brought his Wild West show to Rome. They said, you could have the show in the Colosseum. And he said, I'm sorry, it's too small. At this moment, if you go to the American Academy in Rome, you will see an exhibition of photos of Rome and Las Vegas. What does Las Vegas have to do with Rome? And then, of course, we have America and popular culture. We have our gladiators. Every Sunday, American football provides a spectacle of violence, usually with a number of bodies carried off the field. Fortunately, we don't kill, but we do maim and wound. And then Hollywood has always provided us with something more generally Italian, the gangster film, with a steady diet of dynastic struggle among Italian-American godfathers. Seductively fatal women, mad tyrants, chariot races, and of course, best of all, the orgies are a whole essential part of what are called sword and sandal films. Washington, D.C., with its monumental classical architecture as the political center of the American empire, is in many ways the structural equivalent to Imperial Rome, the most powerful nation on the planet, complete with a fantasized past in which it was a republic, if not a democracy. Perhaps this is why I want to remind you how long Rome has been not a monument, but a ruin. This Piranesi and Turner saw the Forum not when it was monumentalized. There were no museum guards. There were no fences. You can see the cattle roaming through Turner's Rome. It was a place for homeless people. So what is the link between our time, our moment, and Rome? I want to think about these two images together. This is what you might call a generic image of the barbarian invasions of Rome. When civilization itself is at the center of an attack. The barbarians are at the gates. It's a moment that I found in January 2020, January 6th, which will now forever be what? Not a holiday, but something rather different. Not a moment of celebration, but a moment of remembering a trauma when this scene took place. and came extremely close to overthrowing the government of the United States, ending the peaceful transfer of power, which is crucial, and putting an end to American democracy, which is not perfect. I'm not here to say American democracy is just a wonderful thing, but it came very close, much closer than I think we know. And we can see what it was about. It announced itself very clearly of contradictions that were already there for a long time. The Civil War was not over. The banner of the Confederacy was flying along the banner of a would-be fascist dictator who was going to refuse to leave power. So that would be the end of democracy. And this struggle is not over. I feel like we are still in that epoch of political madness. The barbarians were definitely at the gates. This is the shaman of the QAnon conspiracy theory, which says that the elected leaders of the US government are secret pedophiles who are cannibals, sucking the blood of babies. I'm not kidding. This is a firmly believed by millions of people in the United States. If this isn't political madness, I don't know what is. Okay, just a few more images of Rome in Las Vegas, maybe, and now Las Vegas is in Rome. But let me turn now to another way of seeing this whole story. I think Rome has a special importance for any attempt to see contemporary forms of political madness. And this is especially the case with the most famous period of Roman madness, the period called the 12 Caesars, inaugurated by Augustus and punctuated by the regimes of Tiberius, Caligula, and Nero, the principal examples of sovereign madness. That is when the king goes mad, when the head of state loses his mind. And of course, to define this is to say it's what grips men endowed with absolute power over military and financial resources, elevated above the law, and deified as the icons of religious cults. Caligula, as described by Suetonius, was an object of mass fantasy. This is Suetonius. He seemed to the Roman people, one might also say to the whole world, like a dream come true. He turned out to be not a dream, but a nightmare. He demanded deification from the first and regarded himself as the new Jupiter, beheading statues of Jove and replacing them with his own head. A certain US president recently speculated that someday he would join Lincoln and Washington on the faces of Mount Rushmore. Augustus's notoriously evil and cruel wife, Livia, demanded to be made into a god so she could avoid going to hell for her crimes. Unlike humans who are punished for their crimes, the gods are above all human law. For an American, these tales are echoed in the cult status of a recent president whose public criminality remains invulnerable to any legal consequences. Everyone in our country knows the man is a criminal, but the law cannot touch him. He is immune. And this is equally true of his political invulnerability. Famously, even before he was president, he said, "My voters are so smart that I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and I wouldn't lose any voters." A little surprised that deification is on the agenda for a man who claims himself second only to Jesus. I want to ask, why second? Now, the Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius track the legendary careers of the mad emperors in exquisite detail, down to their incestuous and adulterous relationships, murders of relatives, conspiratorial betrayals of friendship, and grandiose spectacles to dazzle the populace and establish cults of political idolatry. All this was condensed for a modern British audience in the 1976 BBC TV series I, Claudius, which put on screen Robert Graves' magnificent 1934 novel by the same title. 1976, since I'm talking about times, is an interesting time. When I, Claudius, arrived in 1976, it was not the ideal moment. For an American, 1976 echoes 1776, the 200th anniversary of the founding, the revolutionary founding, which is a completely idealized and idolized time. It was also the end of an epoch of madness, known as, for me, I was a student and a young professor. It was known as the 1960s, which of course was a crazy time. So 1976 marked the erasure of inconvenient American histories. Slavery, no one wanted to talk about that. The Civil War, Hiroshima, the war in Vietnam, was all idealized spectacles of American triumphalism, with the tall ships sailing up the Hudson River. It was also the moment of the election of a modest, sensible, and completely uncharismatic president known as Jimmy Carter, an ordinary peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia. And it's that year, 76, is widely regarded by historians as the end of the 60s, the end of the civil rights and anti-war movements. So the television show based on Graves's novel, his novel was published during the rise of fascism in Italy and Germany in the 1930s. He regarded his story of Claudius as a message in a bottle from antiquity to the 30s, the period of fascism. He made the brilliant decision to frame Rome's epoch of madness within the first-person perspective of the Emperor Claudius, whose 14-year reign from 41 to 54 AD is generally regarded as a period of temporary sanity, sandwiched between Caligula and Nero. And I think it's important for us to remember in the history of madness, there are periods that we should call temporary sanity. I think Joe Biden may be he's an attempt to restore something like reasonableness to the office of the presidency. And Graves was, I think, obsessed with Claudius, not only because he was sensible, but because nobody else saw him that way. Claudius was famously stigmatized as a limping cripple and a stuttering moron. Could not speak without babble. Here he is with, as portrayed by Derek Jacobi. And one thing I'm urging you to do right now is to go out and watch I, Claudius, the television series once again. I think it has messages for our time. So in a very, Claudius was regarded as an idiot, as a moron, a kind of simpleton. In a very precise sense, Claudius tells the story of his epoch as a tale told by an idiot, quote Shakespeare, or at least a very clever simulation of idiocy that allowed him to survive the poisonings and suicide that plagued Roman dynasties. Everybody thought he was so stupid he was not a danger to anybody, and therefore he survived to become emperor. Robert Graves then employs the narrative conceit of a buried message in a bottle that will remain unknown until it surfaces 1900 years later and brings all the ghosts of Roman madness back to life just in time to confront Italian fascism. Claudius had extensive writings. He wrote histories of the Roman civil wars, the Punic curse, of the destruction of Carthage. All of his writings were destroyed by Nero and Nero's mother. But Graves tells us they missed his autobiography. He made 2 copies, buried one safely, and here in 1934, Robert Graves has dug up Claudius's autobiography for our time. Well, history does not repeat itself, but we need to pay attention to the way it rhymes and resonates, like 76, 19, and 17. Claudius wrote from within a long period of mad tyranny and accession to power by assassination, no peaceful transfers of power. Our time, I think, can properly be seen as an era of fragile democracies teetering on the edge of destruction, with frankly authoritarian regimes in a growing list: Brazil, Turkey, Hungary, Afghanistan, Iran, Cuba, not to mention the great powers of Russia and China. And to conclude with, my own country, the United States, in a precarious condition. Roman memories of peaceful transfers of power were personified by long dead dictators like Sulla, these dictators only ruled for 6 months and then they had to step down. I think Putin is now approaching 20 years, so a very long epoch. The American Constitution was understood by the founding fathers as a model of political sanity. They were quite explicit about the psychology, not just the political structure. They based the Constitution on the ideas of faculty psychology, that the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government were a mirror of the balanced human mind, which has to have a will to execute, has to have a legislate to reason, figure things out, debate, and a principle of judgment. So American Constitution, like many others in the division of powers, was not just a political document. It was a psycho-political document that insisted on division of powers and the peaceful transfer of power of the sovereign from one generation to the next, without war, without assassination. So, now I could go on to many other comparisons. The Roman Senate at the time of Claudius is very weak. The U.S. Senate is a hollow shell of a legislative body. It can never decide anything because it has a special rule that you have to have a supermajority to decide. Majority does not rule. So what's the relation of these 2 times? The epoch of Rome, the epoch of the US and the globe in our time. It would be tempting to deploy Marx's famous remark about historical repetition, that yes, history does repeat itself, but the first time is tragedy, the second time is farce. But maybe we need to turn that back around. The notorious sexual excesses of Rome evidently had a firm basis in reality. In fact, in the 1960s, boys like me who were thinking about joining fraternities, one of the main attractions was called the toga party. I imagine, well, you're too young to know what a toga party was, but it was when American boys dressed up as Roman patricians and tried to lure girls to come and have an orgy. It was very simple. Oh, let's bring Rome back now. So where is the fantasy of sexual excess today? I'm afraid our colleges are places of very good behavior. My university, nobody would have an orgy. The fantasies of sexual excess are now projected onto liberals who are portrayed as blood-sucking child abusers, who are grooming school children for homosexual and transgender identities. So everywhere you see this, and Putin himself is reinforcing this. It's a kind of convergence between the American right and Putin, that the enemy must be involved in deviant sexual practices. Romans tried to control reproduction. They mandated marriage and encouraged multiple children. This may be dimly echoed by the US Supreme Court's effort to control women's bodies and force pregnancy, unwanted pregnancy. So lots of analogies. Other forms of repetition and resonance seem more precise. The prevalence of magical thinking and superstition, mass disinformation and ideological gaslighting, the reduction of political discussion to slogans, and the corruption of what Suetonius called the money madness of Roman imperialism, the idea that money rules everything, and the US's own system of predatory global capitalism. Finally, the threat of a war that would leave not just the Mediterranean and European world in a state of chaos, but the whole planet. Rome survived its epoch of madness and went into a long period of dominance and decline and fall that evolved into a holy version of empire, while the city of Rome fell into ruins. And I only realized recently how long Rome was a ruin. Basically from around 400 to 1900. The population of Rome never got above 100,000 that period. When Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel, there were about 50,000 people living in it. It was a tiny ruined city. So what about our time? Well, we will be lucky if we do not stumble into nuclear war. A new dark ages is in our horizon, much darker than the one that followed the fall of Rome. So I want to now ask a kind of final question here. What use today is the language of psychology and psychiatry, the disciplines that are supposed to understand and cure madness? I'm afraid that most of the time they seem completely powerless. They are just polemical and accusatory labels. We might say Trump and Putin are suffering from psychopathic personality disorders. In fact, the American Psychiatric Association, at the time of his election, declared that was their diagnosis. But they were forbidden from making it public because they can't diagnose someone without a personal interview. Personally, I do not need a personal interview to see when a politician is going mad. Their personality is right there on display. I don't need a private conversation. So psychopathic personality disorder with sociopathic tendencies, in a sense, these are the job descriptions that fascist dictators have exemplified from mad Roman emperors to the present time. And even worse, they don't suffer from these syndromes. They enjoy their symptoms, their feelings of omnipotence. It's other people who get the suffering. And the other people who enjoy their pathologies are the crowds, the deluded psychotic crowds who gather to revel in adoration of the living gods. There's no medical cure. The treatment can only be political, governmental, and I want to say constitutional. Now, if you turned away from this question of political and collective madness, there is a plague now in the US and I think Europe of individual mental disorders. The statistics all bear this out. Accelerated by the pandemic, the incidence of depression, anxiety, panic, addiction, trauma, and other illnesses looks like a medical emergency, at least in the United States. In 2021, the medical journal Lancet estimated, I'm quoting, the pandemic had caused an additional 53.2 million cases of major depressive disorder and 76.2 million cases of anxiety disorder globally. But is this really a medical emergency? Certainly the pharmaceutical industry would like us to think so, possessed by what Claudius called money madness. They are making a bundle off of a rapidly increasing range of psychoactive medications that claim to treat emotional and cognitive disorders, often with side effects that require supplementary medications. A few days after I arrived in Rome, a New York Times article by an assistant professor at UCLA drew thousands of its responses with its common sense argument that mental health is political. The rise in distress, unhappiness, and depression among many global populations is not really a medical problem with a therapeutic solution, much less psychopharmacology. It's rather a normal response to bad systems and structures, failing institutions, environmental degradation, poor health care, dead-end occupation. So the UCLA professor makes a strong case that much of what we call mental illness is really caused by stress, and the stress in turn is caused by something that can only be called political. But then what is the political? And why are the political and socioeconomic systems that dominate the world not merely ineffective, but positively dangerous to the health and long-term prospects for survival of the human species? How has it come to pass that as a species, we now qualify for the legal as opposed to medical definition of insanity, namely that we are a danger to ourselves and others? Seems to me this is the simplest way to put our dilemma. The possibility that human beings are on the very same list of endangered species they are adding to every day provides the premises of another great old science fiction narrative. You all know there is a genre of science fiction in which aliens come from outer space, but they don't come to conquer. They don't come to kill. They come to rescue. My favorite of these is a film called The Day the Earth Stood Still, published, it was released when I was 9 years old, 1951. The alien, played by the laconic Michael Rennie, informs the American president that the entire world is endangered by the invention of nuclear weapons, and he has come to offer a gift in an interplanetary world order that would involve getting rid of all nuclear weapons and establishing a global constitution in which sovereignty would be determined by democratic processes, peaceful transfer of power. You notice that the alien is accompanied by a robot named Gort. Gort is the muscle. Gort is capable of incinerating the entire planet if the world's leaders refuse to cooperate. And of course, you all know how this story ends. A trigger-happy soldier shoots the alien, kills him, and Gort takes him back onto the spaceship and leaves the Earth, saying, "Don't worry, we'll be back." This film, I think, delivers a message from the future just as urgent as the one Claudius delivers from the past. One of the earliest assessments of I, Claudius noted that it departed from the old formulas of cinematic Roman epics, the Hollywood epic, instead focusing on the complex psychology and interiors of Rome. You don't get any spectacles in the stadium. What you get is incredibly modern insight into the psychology of people living in the time of the Roman emperors. One reviewer noted human psychology doesn't change that much through history. So the crazy world of the Roman emperors comes alive in I, Claudius, despite the togas, the marble pillars and furnitures. And the series, although it didn't have much impact politically, did produce a revolution in television at the time. It led the way for long form television and some of my favorite shows, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, and others. So if mental health and the human tendency to fall into madness is at bottom political, that doesn't mean the political has nothing to do with psychology and the analysis of mental disorders. We seem to be in a vicious circle of psychopolitics, which individual mental health is endangered by stressful political realities, and those political realities are driven by toxic interactions between psychopathic politicians and their psychotic followers. That dialectic between psychopathology and psychosis, I think, is the simplest way that you could analyze what has happened to collective mentality in our time. So let me turn in conclusion to the followers. The kind of psychotic delusion, and at the center of it in America is QAnon. This incredible paranoid fantasy, which is medication has no effect. I'm not sure the talking cure has much effect either. We personally know a relative who is a victim of this, and it's an extremely difficult syndrome. The talking cure, it's certainly better that medication obviously doesn't work, but I'm not sure the talking cure does either. I don't know what will. And one hopes that the absorption of the QAnon followers in political cults and charismatic leaders, sometimes it's quite compatible with perfectly normal behavior at the level of personal relationships. They can be nice people. And this is one thing that gives me hope, that they have a split between their political consciousness and their personal relationships. On the other hand, one of the most sinister features of the QAnon, which by the way is now publicly embraced by leaders of the Republican Party, is the way it divides families. Adam Kinzinger, one of the few Republicans who voted to impeach Trump, has been expelled now, not only from the Republican Party, but from his own family as an evil, unforgivable outcast. As Adorno noted in The Authoritarian Personality, the cult often operates as a substitute family, a more authentic home than the original, which was likely dysfunctional itself. In this case, the original and the cult family have merged. So, where do we go? I wish I could believe where my heart is in democratic anarchism and mutual economy, community, equality at all levels, and the freedom to go along with it. Something you sense in everyday life that is part of what we do when human beings are living with each other in harmony. The problem is we have to scale this up to the planet, which I'm afraid is above my pay grade. I don't know how to do it. The idea of a global constitution and the idea of self-governance, and I would ask you to think about that phrase, self-governance, which is the idea of democracy, not being governed from above, but taking care of yourself. I feel like Foucault's late work, when he began to look at governmentality and the care of the self in conjunction with each other, and he began to read the great political and psychological philosopher of China, Confucius, that somewhere in that nexus is where we need to look. My paper today is not concluded. it's at the point where I'm saying, okay, I think I've given you a diagnosis. This is our problem, but what the hell is the cure? Uh, and it is not drugs. Um, it has to be talking. Freud lives. We have to talk to each other, with each other. Uh, and it has to be a model of self-governance. We need to learn to govern ourselves and transmit authority peacefully to each other. This includes things like, I never thought I would say this in 1960. We need to accept the idea of the wisdom of bureaucracy, that self-governance involves division of labor, division of power, many people working together in a system that has enough stability to carry us forward. So I'm nostalgic for the American Constitution with its division of powers. And I'm hopeful, maybe utopian hopeful, for a future in which Foucault's care of the self and the care of the human self might come together. So is the final limit of human madness the crazy idea that the human species could evolve sufficiently to avoid the precipice towards which it's heading? I don't see violent revolution as on the future that I'm in favor of. And isn't the goal of what we have called the humanities and the arts, of science and technology, coming together with Claudius's nostalgia for the Republic and the alien's message from the future to resound as present moment of political decision unfolds? To be continued.